Nick, we're live. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thanks so much, Chris, for having me on, and looking forward to answering some of the tough questions that you have. So, yeah.
No worries. We got a lot to unpack. It's like you were saying before we started recording or streaming here on Twitch and LinkedIn, and later for those people listening on the podcast. Chess is a bit left of field towards what's normally covered in esports, and I think it's almost like sometimes it's like I wouldn't say the crux of a joke, but there's always that thing when people say esports aren't a sport, and you say, well, what is chess then? Is chess a sport? Because if it is, then esports is a sport. So it's good to, get together to have a bit of a chat about it.
Yeah, no, totally agree. It's kind of ironic that you bring that up. Recently we were doing a little bit of SEO work. And we often do quite a bit of keyword research, and some of the common search phrases and search terms. One among them was, is chess a sport, right? And we actually have our article is in the #1 slot as the search result for that. I went back and I was looking at, I think this is an article from maybe 2017 or early 2018, something like that. And the consensus is that nobody really knows, right? Chess has all the elements of a sport and of an esport when put in the proper context and the proper light. In that it takes mental fortitude and reaction speed, endurance training and things like that. But at the same time, I mean, you're not physically moving in the same way that you would a lot of sports. It's an interesting kind of ongoing discussion. I think it will be debated for the rest of time or the rest of chess's existence.
That's true. Yeah. Well, what is your answer to that then? Do you have a basic answer? Yes or no?
Yeah. I think chess is whatever people want it to be. I think overall, I know that's kind of a cop out, but chess can be a sport if you want to frame it as a sport or a game. But I think overall, maybe what chess is most importantly is an intellectual endeavor and something of an intellectual status symbol, if you will, right? Something that's become really popular over the last few years are learning platforms where people are able to dive into topics that they love and learn about them from different experts in different fields. And we feel the same way about chess, that we're the leading preeminent kind of expert in the field. So a lot of our tools and especially our premium tools are based on learning. Not just to be able to get better at chess, but also launching LinkedIn initiatives about using chess to improve at your job at analytical thinking and problem solving, pattern recognition, things of that nature. And we think that that's a real path forward for chess, into the future.
Give us an idea of the size of chess.com. How many users, what the size and scale of your operation, and maybe also the size and scale of the market as a whole, as in chess, professionally worldwide.
Yeah, no, so interestingly, and this is like an eyebrow-raising moment every time I bring this up, but we're approaching 34 million members. We gain nearly 20,000 new members each day, sometimes over that, in fact, these days. Scale of our operation is kind of interesting. We're a remote company, actually, and people ask us often, like, where are your headquarters? We're spread out, among multiple continents, including both Australia, United States, Europe, Asia. We're all over the place, South America. We have about 160 employees right now, working full or part-time. And yeah, we're in nearly 200 countries, actually, our users. So we have a pretty significant market share. It's interesting being a market leader and having the majority of the market share among online chess sites. And obviously that brings its own unique challenges, right? So we just, on December 31st, actually New Year's Eve of this last year, we broke into the Alexa top 500 sites for the first time. So we're a pretty consistently growing operation. And yeah, it's kind of interesting. In terms of the professional landscape, it's almost diametrically opposed to what I just talked about. I mean, the professional landscape is very niche and closed off for chess. There are select few ways that you can make a living in chess. One of them is playing. And typically that's only if you're in, let's say the top sometimes even 50 to 100 in the world. The other way is coaching, which is how the majority of professionals make their living, by coaching for let's say all the way down from $5 per hour in some countries, upwards of 20,000 euro per week if you're an ex-world champion and you're working with a potential future world champion. So there's a lot of variance in these things, right? And typically chess, like any other sport, any other individual sport, like let's say tennis or golf, has significant concentration at the top, and you have that second tier of professionals who you would think are making a healthy living and are able to survive. But the truth is that the money just isn't there sometimes in chess, and that typically we've relied, not we as a company, but chess as a game has relied upon, donors and philanthropists to, like Rex Sinkfield and other individuals who have put a lot of their own money graciously into chess to make sure that the players are taken care of and that, frankly, they're supporting the ecosystem. So it's kind of interesting how those are two different things.
Yeah, so I guess like if you're looking at a traditional traditional esports player versus a chess player, right? Like the way that someone would earn money being an esports player is through a salary, say from a team they might be contracted to, from sponsorship, from prize tournament winnings, from coaching, like you were saying. That used to be very common, especially 5-10 years ago, for players who that's how they paid their rent, or they got themselves to tournaments through coaching. And then endorsements, and sponsorship sitting on top of that. Is there prize pool in any of your sort of chess tournaments? Do you have a chess World Cup kind of thing?
Yeah, so there are prize funds in basically every tournament that gets played. Now, obviously, these range on a low level from hundreds of dollars up to millions of dollars. So the preeminent, let's say, events in what we would call over-the-board chess, which is playing live in person, holding the pieces and grabbing them, is the World Championship, which typically has a prize fund of, let's say $1 to $2 million. And then something called the Grand Chess Tour, which is, again, run by St. Louis Chess Club, who we have a healthy relationship with. And they run a series of chess events around the world, which, has prizes in excess of $1 million as well. The thing about that is that, as I said before, a lot of this is concentrated towards the top players, right? So you have maybe the top 15 players in the world that are doing very well, while a lot of others languish. And it goes the same thing for sponsorships, right? Where a lot of sponsorships for guys like Magnus Carlsen, who is the current world champion. Sponsors want to be on Magnus's jacket, and they want to be on his, they want to be his water bottle sponsor. But it's difficult to find those jacket and water bottle sponsors for a guy that's sitting, maybe 20th in the world, who has dedicated his entire life to chess. But the truth is that unless you're in that very, very top of what we would call super grandmasters, really difficult to make a living outside of, again, teaching others the game, or finding some sort of commercial venture to do a lot better. But there are prizes. So if you're willing to grind and travel around the United States or around the world, I mean, you can make a living. It's just going to be a tough one, and you're going to be footing the bill on a lot of your travel costs. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's something that echoes across every single sport, right? There's kind of that 0.01% that's living very fine, and everybody under them is struggling in their own right, depending on what level and what game and where they play. Sometimes the ecosystem does extend down a little bit further in certain titles with that community support, but often it kind of doesn't. And yeah, it's interesting to see, that exact same thing, happening across. Yeah. Some of the questions for you is what's the skill gap like when you get to that top level? Like, what differentiates a good chess person versus another? Like, I think we've all seen documentaries where, they say chess masters are thinking, 13 steps ahead. We've all seen the videos where, they're playing kind of 20 different tables at once and that kind of stuff too. But what is the main differentiator when you're getting, like you're saying, the chess number one in the world versus number two? What's going to be the advantage for one winning over the other?
So that's actually a really interesting question. Well, first of all, I should go ahead and reference the 2018 World Championship, which is interesting for a few reasons. First of all, we ran a broadcast on chess.com on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/chess, which gained 118 million minutes watched in the month of November. It ended up being the highest viewed, the most viewed event on Twitch, most viewed channel on Twitch for the month, and became the most viewed chess event of all time in history. So that was kind of interesting. But what was interesting about it was that over the 12 games that comprised the World Championship in 2018, all 12 of them ended in draws between Magnus Carlsen and the number 2, Fabiano Caruana. So people, are like, I mean, there's too many draws in chess and all these different complaints. Magnus Carlsen ended up winning in faster chess tie breaks, which I'll get into later. But the point is that there's very little separating these players at the very top. To a layman, right, they wouldn't even see the difference between the top player in the world and the maybe even, 200th player in the world or something. I mean, it's very, very difficult to tell the difference, in the same way that if you don't play a sport and you're watching professionals play the sport, may be difficult to tell exactly who is better than the other player if it's a complicated, complex sport. And I think that's something that's really interesting for sure. So
it sounds like I mean, once again, I guess, and this is like a thing that we'll be talking about so many times throughout this. There's so many comparisons between, the professional sport and professional esports, the same way that there's so many comparisons between that and traditional sports. And one awesome thing you were saying, and we talked a lot about pre-recording, is about, chess seems to be really making a name for itself on Twitch. And that seems to be so many industries that have struggled to make money for people. I think they're all starting to realize now that content is the answer. When StarCraft 2 was kind of fading as it has been over many years, and the tournaments not having the same clout or the same pool of sponsor interest as before, they all start flocking to Twitch TV to start streaming. Professionals, when they start leaving Counter-Strike and other games as well, are no longer just known as being the top, but they're able to make a good living by being a personality, but also decent enough at the game to be able to teach people at the same time. And once again, centered around things like Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, other social medias.
Yeah, that's a great point. Chess is unique in the regard that when I speak with representatives from Twitch, our category is unique with the generosity of donors within the category, and the passion and love that the viewers have for the individual streamers. There are streamers making a living who you never would expect to make a living in chess otherwise. The reality is that they're simply not strong enough players to make a living or playing online chess, but they are strong enough to make a living in streaming, right? I mean, these might be players who are not even in the top 2,000 or 5,000 players in the world, or some that are, right? And the reality is that that's one of the other ways to make a living now in chess that didn't exist before, and where there used to only be a few ways to make it. Now you have someone like Alexandra Botez, who is a women's FIDE master, who is having profiles of herself done on major news networks, and is representing Chess.com and the Chess.com streamers program, which now comprises 150 streamers under our umbrella, and we'll end up having probably 1 billion minutes watched this year over all of those channels, which is something that's really incredible. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. I think that you have sort of a concentration of very serious donors who allow these streamers to make a living, and then you have the entire chess community who helps support them, not only in giving to their channels, but also in helping the myriad charity streams that they put on. So it's really fascinating how a lot of that's been cultivated over the last couple of years, and since we started our partnership with Twitch back in 2017. The onus has been on us to really expand what we would call, let's say, the middle class of chess streamers, right? Those who have current viewers of maybe 100 to 500, and to be able to grow their channels along with our own. And we put a lot of resources and time and effort, whether that be graphical assistance or production assistance or promotion on chess.com or on Twitch for that matter, in order to bring them to the level where they might be able to make supplementary income. And I think it's pretty fascinating for sure.
Yeah, and one of the things that you brought up that was super interesting to me as a topic to discuss before we went live was around the IP. So like a super common thing, that people always say to me is about esports and gaming being at the Olympics, and reminding people that there is an IP holder at the top of all that. And that means there's commercial reasoning for things to get in there. No one necessarily owns the right for someone to strap on shoes and go running. And no one really owns the right for someone to play chess, off you go. But if you're playing League of Legends at the Olympics, that's attached to that, to play on their servers, and they've got a monetary possibility for you being there through microtransactions or purchasing the game or something like that. So how does it work within the chess field?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. So like as you mentioned, we don't own the IP around chess, right? And so it's up to us not just to develop, let's say, new pieces of IP via loot boxes or other microtransactions where traditional titles would try to make money. It's up to us to, let's say, manipulate the game in certain ways that existing players and existing player bases might find fascinating, find ways to differentiate ourselves from the competition. So that comes through inventions like Puzzle Rush, which is sort of, you can think of it like chess Tetris in a way. You're solving as many puzzles, chess puzzles as you can within a certain amount of time. And through some of our learning offerings, right, some of our lessons that feature grandmasters who are the top level of chess players that are able to walk you through certain concepts or explain something that you might be able to see on a broadcast. Yeah, the majority of our offerings come from premium offerings and from our premium members who obviously we value quite a bit. The pricing of our premium memberships ranges from $40 to $99 per year. And yeah, we've been growing steadily with our premium users, but also with what we've been offering to our premium users. There's it's definitely kind of strange because we don't really work in microtransactions. We work on monthly and yearly subscription services. But obviously that's been quite popular over the last, let's say decade or so, that a lot of companies have been transitioning to that. And that's kind of how we built our platform with that in mind from a commercial perspective. But again, you don't own the IP. So even from a broadcast perspective, let's say within esports, again, you have to be willing to make that upfront investment on something like the Pro Chess League where, it costs a lot of money, frankly, to run a league of this size where we have 24 teams consisting of, let's say, a dozen players on each roster that we need to coordinate with. And these are professional players who would otherwise be coaching and be playing and be traveling. And we have to find a way to incentivize them methodically while searching out title sponsors, receiving some support from Twitch in the way of exposure and making sure that we're building pitch decks that make us attractive to potential partners for us, right? And we've been able to do that. Luckily, we've just brought on a title sponsor for this year, working with Chess Party AS, which we will be hosting our Pro Chess League Live Finals in Oslo in late May, and we're extremely excited about that. And it's our biggest deal that we've signed in company history. And we just secured that actually last week. So we're super happy about the way that things are going for chess. That we're the only really commercially viable company not relying on the philanthropy of individuals or consortiums or having to raise money from outside investors. And yeah, it's it's been absolutely fascinating for sure. But yeah, the IP question is definitely an interesting one. It's kind of double edged, it's difficult. Wish we could claim the IP. That'd be nice. I'd love to. We just keep it for ourselves.
With chess being a game that's hundreds of thousands of years old, what do you think has hindered the commercial viability of it until now? Often you see sports, once they reach that 100 years old, they're filling out 100,000 person stadiums. They've got teams, they've got billions of dollars of investment of in equity and sponsorship and stuff coming through. But chess is still in that very early stage where it's fighting to become a thing.
Yeah, I can tell you precisely why. It's because chess is hard. Chess is just difficult to learn. There's a really steep learning curve to it. It's a bit like golf in that way, where let's say if you spend like a few hours with it, if you spend a few hours with the game itself, it might become a little easier for you. But if you try to divulge, or if you try to invest, let's say, multiple days or multiple weeks or even years, you're going to end up hitting multiple plateaus there. And I think it's difficult to convince people how or why they should try to push through and conquer those plateaus where you just don't face those same sorts of obstacles in the same way with a lot of premium titles. Sometimes that's because chess is not a co-op, right? It's not a game where you're able to rely on strong teammates. I watch quite a bit of Rocket League, and I see three guys working well together in RLCS, and I think to myself, this is completely different from chess, right? You can't really be carried, so to speak, by a teammate. It just doesn't work like that. You can in team chess, but not quite in the same way. You still have to win your own games. You're not able to rely on a specific skill, and you need a rounded skill set. So I think that's why it's just that, and that's why it's up to chess.com and other chess entities, frankly, and organizations to make chess significantly more accessible by putting on broadcasts where, the expert in the field may not be the best fit for commentary. You just because you have a grandmaster that's available to do commentary for your game, if they start rattling off board coordinates and specific moves and what we would call lines, which is a series of moves, like you referenced earlier, grandmasters thinking multiple moves ahead. If you have viewers who've never even watched chess before, they don't know the board coordinates. What are they going to do? They're going to see you on Twitch. They might see you on the front page. And they hear a few letters and numbers thrown together, and they just instantly go to the next game that they might actually understand. And I think that there's something sort of like the indie music scene where all the indie music fans of a band may complain that their band should be significantly more popular, right? But the second that people start piling in and start liking that band, they want to be more closed off. They want to insulate that band's popularity. And I think that's a lot of what's happened to chess. You have a lot of people talking about how chess should be more popular and then not taking the proper steps to make that happen. So, we play around with doing what would be considered some pretty radical things, right? Putting on amateurs to call some of our major broadcasts. So that way, with the thought of this being that if we team someone who is at an average rating relative to our entire user base, and we pair them with a grandmaster or an international master, they're able to ask the kind of questions that chat might be scared to ask, or that viewers might be scared to ask. I mean, chess is intimidating, and the less intimidating you can make it, I think the better off the entire ecosystem is. That's what's been keeping chess down for many, many years. Not to mention the fact that from a viewing perspective, chess on a board is a relatively stationary 3D game, and on the internet is a 2D, not particularly graphics intensive game. I mean, there are a lot of really interesting strategy games that I can tell you firsthand. A lot of our top players in the world love watching. I mean, there's sometimes where some of our top players are watching Hearthstone tournaments while they're playing chess or something, or watching auto chess or something like that, right? And these are games that are a little bit more engaging graphically, and I think that that's only going to become more of a growing problem for chess on the whole. And so we have to figure out ways to make it a little easier on everybody.
Yeah, there's a couple of things you identified there that's interesting. Number one is the entry. And, MOBA games like League of Legends and Dota 2 and such, that's why they have a hard time growing user base, because it's simply just so hard to learn what 100 different heroes do and the 100 different items they can buy and how their 4 skills per hero affect each other in different ways, judging by what items and, what time in the game you're sitting at that particular time. And it sounds similar. And the graphical thing's very interesting to me, because I mean, you go to chess.com and it doesn't look like a website that's from 2020. It doesn't look amazingly graphical.
Sure.
But that's because, like, how can it be? Does that erode some of the competitive integrity of the game if you start putting flashy, exciting things in there? But is that needed to be able to draw in these new people? And I guess you get that all the time in esports. The most purest of first-person shooters is, a game like Quake. An arena FPS is basically dead as far as esports goes. It's virtually non-existent because it's too hard and the graphics are often too simple. The gameplay is too linear, but that's because it's amazingly skill-based. But that's not exciting to people who want power-ups and ultimates like in Overwatch and flashy, exciting things and different skins to keep people, actively engaged.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest upgrade on a chessboard would be advancing a pawn and turning it into a queen. And so it's difficult to get people as excited about that as it is, acquiring a new weapon or being able to power up on something else in a different title. And I think, it's absolutely something. It's kind of interesting, right? I mean, in our chess.com settings, we have something called arcade mode, which basically, creates flashes of lightning when you capture pieces and things like that. But it's not really in the same vein as again, more graphically intensive games. I would be really fascinated to see that once, let's say, augmented reality starts becoming a bigger thing, right? And I think that it's really only a matter of time before people are able to basically play games in real life, right? And be able to interact. I mean, chess is going to have to evolve in that same way. And I think it's going to be very difficult, and it may take something groundbreaking. But not that I'm bearish on chess, because obviously the game's been around for a very long time and has a lot of staying power. But the point is that I do think that if the chess community becomes complacent, that we are in some danger of having some of the chess, I guess, market share taken away by other more interactive strategy games that, frankly, try to emulate some of the complexity of chess. And I mean, there's plenty of arguments that chess is not even the most complex game, right? I mean, that Go is the most complex game, or anything else. And I think that that's why it's really important for companies like chess.com and in FIDE and other large chess organizations to try to take a really sober view of how to make chess more popular, and also the players, right? That the players, frankly, should probably be a little more engaging, a little more willing to do interviews when they lose, or have various things happen to them. And these are some of the things you see in sports that are just kind of agreed upon by everyone involved, that, look, this is for the good of the game, and we're going to have to get that together. And I think that's actually, kind of to bring this back around to esports, that's kind of something that esports has sort of traditionally faced opposition to, is that a lot of esports stars, they're stars for a reason. They're stars because they have spent the majority of their time training. They spend the majority of their time playing, and they hang out with the same people quite often. And so it's difficult when you throw them in an arena with 100,000 people watching them, or 80,000 people watching them live, and you have millions at home. It's like, how do you expect them to act, right? I mean, of course they're going to be a little closed off and a little reserved, and I think that now you're starting to have a lot of guys that are breaking out of their shell because they're becoming more used to it. But certainly in esports infancy, which we're still in, it's really difficult to ask them to act differently. And chess is it even more of a disadvantage for a few reasons. I mean, obviously, when you're playing live in person over the board, you're not allowed to make noises. I mean, you can't go around talking to other players. You need to stay quiet. You're not talking to the fans. They're not cheering for you. It's really fascinating. And so, we're trying to break that kind of mold with the Pro Chess League, where players are wearing noise canceling headphones and the fans are able to cheer, and the fans are clapping and trying to, shake hands with them after the game. And that's it's kind of foreign. It's interesting to see some of the biggest stars in chess who, maybe in their, late 20s, early 30s, sometimes in their 40s, and they're just shocked and taken aback by that kind of atmosphere. It's just completely foreign to them, No.
Yeah, it's like, it's always that balance, right? Like, how do you innovate while still staying true to what the core of what the thing is? And I guess as esports as a whole, sometimes that's easier because a brand new game can come out, and that can be enough grounds to shake people up. And a Fortnite can come out where, yes, it's a shooter, but also you're building buildings at the same time, which is the opposite to anything like Battlefield, where you're destroying buildings. So that's enough to shake it up and to change the way people think. And then with that can come new stalwarts of, you're expected to act like this if you're a Fortnite pro. You're expected to create content, and other industries are trying to learn from that. But yeah, how do you take that thousands of years old game and try to innovate while still being true to the competitive nature of it? And it sounds like you guys are on a definite track. And I guess the other part, like we touched on before, is what's the path to pro? What are the feeder leagues like? How are you getting this new generation of chess grandmasters?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, chess is really unique in the sense that it's socially acceptable to pull your kids out of school at age like 10 and 11 years old, because that they're going to be one of the great players in the world. We have a close relationship with a player called Ali Reza Firouja, who is a 16-year-old Iranian grandmaster and is currently in the top 25 players in the world. And what's fascinating about that is that not only is he in the top 25 players in the world, I mean, he has been an established grandmaster now for multiple years. And again, he's 16 years old. So, he's reached already the upper echelons of the sport before he would have even, the guy can barely drive, right? And it's absolutely fascinating to see people like this who have already dedicated their entire lives, been supported by governments and by their parents who, frankly, make a ton of sacrifices. So the one path, I guess the one thing I'll say is that the path starts really early, right? Most top players in the world have been playing chess and have been playing chess at a high level since they were, under 10 years old. And there's an American named Abi Mishra who recently became the youngest international master in history. And there are a lot of guys like this who you just see come through, right? There's a whole contingent of very good young Indian players who are becoming grandmasters, at 12, 13, 14 years old. I mean, it's really fascinating stuff, right? Where the path to professionalism is really getting over the hump of there are like certain ratings classes in chess, right? Where when you're classified as a grandmaster, typically, and not always, you'll fall between the ratings of 2,500 and 2,800, or now 2,900, because Magnus Carlsen has been climbing significantly. And, there are thresholds kind of at every ratings class where you can say to yourself, okay, in this ratings class, I'm going to be getting invited to these type of events that have these types of prize funds. And then you do the math. You're like, well, am I the best player in this field? Okay, what does first place take home, right? And then you start trying to determine whether you can really play chess for a living, whether you need to supplement it with with coaching or some other endeavor, or even streaming, like Hikaru Nakamura. Who does make a great living, I'm sure, playing chess, streaming chess, and being part of the community, and that's all pretty fascinating. That you still, even at top levels, have to find ways to really enter as many tournaments as you can. This last year was the busiest tournament schedule of probably of all time in chess, right? Which made scheduling very difficult on organizers of events, including ourselves, right? And it's interesting to see how many top grandmasters, just for the sake of competition or wanting to win a little bit of cash, will play in an event that lasts for, let's say, 2 hours and has a prize fund of like $2,000. I mean, they're willing to do it, again, not just because they want to play against some of their peers, but really because they do want to win some cash. And we see ourselves as the shepherds of the game in that way, in many ways, right? That the path to professionalism is paved through climbing the ratings classes, playing on a lot of chess.com's events, a lot of online events in general, and then attempting to find your niche within certain ratings classes of tournaments that you can enter and potentially win. That's just the reality of it, right? And I think at this point in time in the modern era, the true goal I think would be, aside from winning the world championship, finding a way to get into the Grand Chess Tour, where only the top 10 to 12 players end up playing, but that a minimum prize for an event might be $17,000, $25,000. I mean, it's you're talking about like a week-long event, right? And that can make a significant difference to a player who might be bringing in a low six-figure salary in terms of prize fund or sponsorships. And yeah, it's sort of a nebulous path to professionalism. There is no one set way that you say, well, now I'm a professional and now I'm not, because you don't have anyone paying you a salary. You don't play for an eSports team. There is no Fnatic or G2 or NRG paying you money to live in the house and train all day in a certain title. Like, that just doesn't exist in chess. That's the reality of it. And you kind of have to make your own way. It's a very lonely world, a lonely existence. And a lot of these guys end up using each other for support in many ways. After every single game, you'll see something called a post-mortem, where the players talk about the game that they just played with each other, and they're pointing at the board and you can't hear what they're saying, but they're talking about where they went wrong in a game or where they had a critical chance. And yeah, it's something absolutely fascinating. They're just constantly trying to improve each other so that they're trying to elevate the game. And frankly, in my opinion, at the very, very top levels, they're trying to insulate themselves even a little bit from that second tier of players who want to chase after them and take their spot. And they're sure as hell not giving it up. So yeah, that's the way that it goes.
What is the audience data like? Average age, where are they living? Like, what are their interests?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what we're talking about here. If we're talking about chess.com, the majority of our users are between the ages of 35 and 44, but that's not really completely exclusive. Our second highest group is between 25 and 34, and our third highest is between 55 and 64. But in terms of viewership, from the data that we've gathered, the vast majority are between 18 and 35, and that's a pretty significant portion of them. From a user base perspective, 25% of our users are female, which, I mean, frankly, women's chess doesn't really get enough exposure as is. And we've seen other numbers from other chess apps and other companies and subsidiaries that we own who have upwards of 30% female users, right? So we do get a really healthy viewership as well from women. And a lot of our biggest stars, our biggest streamers, and our biggest hosts are also female. So yeah, it's sort of interesting. About 33% of our users come from the United States, with the other 67% coming from around the world, about 30% from Europe or so. And then, the usual suspects, where you have a pretty sizable contingent from Russia, from the United Kingdom, from Germany as well. And interestingly, on that note, we broadcast in 11 different languages, and we get significant viewership in Spanish, French, and German. And what's interesting about that is that, they directly align with, Twitch's biggest viewer base. I mean, Twitch, I think their third biggest viewer base comes from Germany, and their second comes from the UK. And we see that reflected in our numbers as well, even for chess. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. The typical user is, again, someone who I think values intellectual endeavors, and it's not just chess; it's all kinds of stuff. And is typically, relatively educated, but not always. But the reality is that as long as you have a computer and access of some sort to the internet, I mean, you can play on chess.com for free as much as you want. So we have plenty of users from countries that have relatively underdeveloped infrastructures, technological infrastructures that have a great time playing on chess.com and are able to get on and play with somebody, halfway around the world. And yeah, it's kind of difficult to nail down the exact type of viewer that we always appeal to.
Yeah, there's just so many there's just so many crossovers between, you know, where you guys are at right now and where esports was 5 to 10 years ago. It's insane, you know, just seeing that. And it's interesting seeing the limitations around the lack of IP, you know, around it being something hard to get into, but there's so much blue sky opportunity there. And now you're able to discover and I guess have the technology to be able to use things like Twitch and such, like you were saying, for these people to be able to support themselves. And there's so many likenesses, even between StarCraft 2 pro player that I used to sponsor and manage called Pig. Same thing, you know, our sponsorship of him was a couple $1,000s a year, and that was really a travel budget for him to get to events. You know, the way he paid his rent was by coaching people for $30 an hour, you know, 10 hours, 15, 20 hours a week, while also trying to play at the same time and develop himself on Twitch. So there's so many, you know, likenesses across that, whereas you'd have some of the players at EG in the US would be getting paid a salary and have a house and all that kind of stuff made for them because they're the top 5, the top 10 in the world, where Pig was, you know, probably top 30 at that time. And there's so many, so many interesting things across that. What do the current sponsors in the market look like? Like you mentioned some of the classic, you know, say a drink bottle sponsorship or something like that. Are there any other typecasts? Like, you know, in esports at the moment, there's a massive boom, obviously of snack food, that's obvious, but of automotive. Like, are there any industries that are really taking a liking to chess?
There's a very specific industry, and it's financial services, trading, and investment firms.
Right. Okay.
It's weird, right? We don't attract so many consumer products. There have been individual consumer products, drinks, and, you know, beverages, things like that. Red Bull sponsored Hikaru Nakamura for a few years, and we do have sponsors like that, right? Especially built around speed chess. But primarily, we get our sponsorships come from again trading firms, from investment firms, from brokerages, right? And actually, very recently, we were in negotiations with, and we're still in ongoing negotiations with, you know, a multi-billion-dollar valuation investment company who, you know, is still private, but is very, you know, trendy, kind of cutting edge. And it was kind of interesting. They were interested in chess, right? That I'm like, why is that? And when we spoke with their representatives, they told us that they saw a lot of crossover with the kind of people who were who were interested in chess and, you know, want to learn pattern recognition and strategy and tactics, and then studying the same thing within stocks, within options and futures. And that's fascinating to me. So the good news for us is that with that industry being interested in chess, they typically have relatively high profit margins, right? You see across the financial sector, profit margins of anywhere from 9 to 15%, which is abnormal. Whereas within retail, you might have, say, 2 to 5% typically, with all overhead included. So the good news is that there's a lot of expendable income. The bad news is that because it's not a consumer product that these companies are always pitching, you have to come up with significantly more creative pitches to bring them on board, right? I mean, they're not sitting there like, well, we really want to sell our high net worth individual asset management to the people watching events on chess.com. I mean, it doesn't work like that. I mean, how many of those people are really watching? I mean, there might be a few, but not too many. But what they do say to us is, look, we're looking for the best and brightest people and people who can solve problems. And that's what makes us money, right? We make money from hiring the right people to work for us. Can you find us those people? And you'd be surprised at how effective a strategy like that could be and how valuable that could be for multiple companies, frankly. So, so, you know, to use one example, and again, I'm not saying that this is the specific strategy behind it, but we just recently signed a partnership deal with SIG Trading, who has multiple billions of assets under management. And they'll be our partner on a couple of events coming up, including the Bullet Chess Championship in April. And, you know, again, we had really unique and interesting discussions with them when we first talked to them, and they've been involved with chess in the past. But when we first talked to them, we were like, you know, what is it that you guys are looking for? Because they don't really sell, you know, a consumer product. And once we got through discussions, we started to really understand their viewpoint. And so, you know, we have employees of our own, in fact, that have come from the financial sector that said that they see a lot of parallels between chess and finance. And so, yeah, that's one niche. I'd say the other one is typically, you know, luxury products. So you have luxury products from Europe. To use an example, Isklar, which is sort of a luxury water bottle or water company, has been sponsoring players for a while. And you see some of the you know, government-owned companies, like, for instance, Gazprom or Fosagro from Russia, has gotten significantly involved in chess. So you do see a lot of those, right? A lot of sort of industrial companies that are at least owned in whole or in part by foreign governments. And that has been both a blessing and a curse for chess, I should say. And I told you I'd be super truthful on this podcast. And the reality is that something that's held chess back for so many years is, frankly, FIDE's and FIDE are the global governing body for chess. FIDE has been, pretty close with a lot of companies that, frankly, have maybe turned off a lot of potential Western sponsors. They've been very closely aligned with more Eastern European sponsors that I think it's been difficult for companies that are large Fortune 500 companies from the United States who frankly have the capital to spend to sponsor major events. And I mean, they've just been turned off by both some of the sponsorships and frankly, some of the behavior. Luckily for us, we believe that the new administration within FIDE is really trying to turn a corner with Arkady Dvorkovich and Emil Satovsky and David Yada. And so we're pretty optimistic. We've been working with them quite a bit lately, but again, in the past, I mean, it's been an absolute nightmare trying to get sponsors into chess. I mean, it's been completely sabotaged, and like I said, so now it's been up to to independent philanthropists. In fact, there have been times in the past, Chris, where a world championship hasn't even been held. Right? I mean, this actually happened one year where there was no sponsor to be able to secure a prize fund, so the world championship just didn't happen.
Well.
And that's insane, right? I mean, that's crazy for a game that's been around so long and that frankly was very popular. And I mean, these are some of the problems that you see in chess. It's not dissimilar to FIFA. If anyone out there listening is familiar with soccer, I mean, it's a lot of internal turmoil, a lot of just shady characters, and chess is not immune to that. I mean, chess is full of the best and the worst of people. And I mean, it's a real thing. But again, I'm hoping that everybody's trying to turn the corner now.
It sounds like part of it is the decorporatization needs to be a strategy that comes into it, right? When you said that, it has that allure around intellectuals, around government-owned assets, around high-quality water. You'd also say an instant thing would be Mercedes, BMW, Rolex, these kind of brands. But what does that mean for someone who doesn't consider himself an intellectual but just really likes the game? Are they a lesser person for liking Pringles but also liking chess at the same time?
I mean, that's a major problem. Yeah.
And it goes back into like we were saying before, and like you were saying about how to make things exciting for people, right? Like, does it have to be this the way it's always been just because that's the way it is? Does it have to be a 2D board where you just, a pawn takes another pawn and it just disappears? Like, can there be something else? Can it be more exciting for the younger audience? Can there be something cool that happens? Can there be halftime shows? Or does it have to be the same all the time? Very churchy, chessy kind of thing where it's very straight up and down. No one's cheering, no one's excited because, you're intelligent, and that's what you're supposed to do when you're intelligent, is shut up and think and that kind of stuff. But is that the right thing? And can you build that balance? Between all of them? And people will always fight back. People hated Counter-Strike Source. They boycotted that whole game because it was a much lower skill ceiling than CS 1.6. There were a lot of things in Counter-Strike 1.6 that you could do, such as movement through the air, such as spamming through walls that would punish brash behavior. So if you'd made a stupid move, you would get punished for that in CS 1.6. In Source, you could make it and you wouldn't really get punished for it. So people boycotted that game, and they boycotted CSGO, the latest title, when it came out, until it became a bit better. But in the end, people conformed because CSGO installed things like in-game items that you could purchase for microtransactions, and part of that was shared with the teams that would play in the tournaments. So it allowed everybody to make money. The makings of these microtransactions and these products brought in a whole bunch of kids as well that were interested in the shiny new guns that looked interesting. They didn't do anything to the game. If you have an M4 skin that's nice and blue with a sticker on it, it doesn't shoot any extra bullets. It doesn't make it any more powerful, but it just makes people more interested in that. And from looking at that, that's something that's super interesting. So, hey, can there be a thing where the pawns are specifically colored to the player? Can one person have, silver pawns with a sponsor logo on them, and this other, world champion, he's known for having the shiny gold pawns. It looks like a gold Desert Eagle that you see in some video games sometimes.
Sure. I think, first of all, that's possible. I mean, within the chess.com platform, you're able to customize your pieces and your board and things like that. But I think maybe what is more synonymous and more parallel to what you're talking about, being able to customize what the pros would be using, is like lesson series about how to play like the pro specifically. Because again, chess is just so difficult that frankly, the majority of the time, people are just trying to figure out how to play the game correctly. And so we've had a lot of success on lesson series that are like, look, can you play like Ali Reza Firouzja? Can you play like Hikaru Nakamura? Can you play like Magnus Carlsen? And then, they basically get taught how to play in that same style. And the style of play ends up being, something that is similar to the style of a gun or the style of, for your example, pieces or something like that. It's like being able to move in the same way, playing the same types of games, being able to solve puzzles in the same way is something that I think is really attractive from that perspective. It's, again, a lot more difficult aside from just normal skins on boards or on pieces. That hasn't been attracting people quite as much, I think, as those curated lessons are built around those celebrity chess players. But I totally agree with your point. I mean, yeah, it's funny. The Pro Chess League, which I mentioned earlier, we're in our fourth season now, and we've grown in viewership significantly since the first season. I mean, multiple thousands of percent, right? But even year over year, we've grown, 30 to 90% in every measurable category so far through the first 6 weeks of the season. And it's fascinating when we get to the live finals, and there's like guys playing in jerseys, right? I mean, we had esports jerseys made for last year's final, and then we had kids that wanted to buy them, right? And so they were literally, we weren't even actually selling the jerseys. We had jerseys that were pinned up that had been signed by players that we were giving away as like a raffle, right? And then I had little kids coming up to me and they were like, can we buy those jerseys that are on the wall? And I had a box of them sitting in the back right behind like the ticket counter. And so we just started giving out these jerseys to kids and selling them to adults when we never expected to do that, right? I think that's the other thing, right? When you have the names of these players that these guys recognize, these people recognize from tournaments and from playing on the internet, it's kind of an interesting feeling. It was a little bit of like a watershed moment, I think, for chess in that way. And there are many other watershed moments to be had for sure, because we're still definitely in our infancy in terms of engagement.
Yeah, and you're in that advantageous position that I always say about esports versus traditional sports. Like, what can we learn from them, and how can we take the good things they've done and try to avoid the bad things? And similar with you guys right now where you're sitting, what can you learn from esports and traditional sports in that development? And what can you do that's advantageous, like Twitch streaming and such, and the commercialization, but what can you do that's bad? It's like super over commercialization, like the championship gaming series was in Counter-Strike in 2008, where they had ring girls and, kind of fireworks in a studio, and they made it all third person, even though there was a first person view available. They put these jerseys on the players that look dumb, all this kind of stuff too. So, what can you learn from all of those and implement for you guys? But it's just always, it's always that hard problem that we go back to a few times, is how do you keep the competitive integrity of the game without making it too like, wacky, zany, hey kids, come and watch this cool chess thing, and maintain, the thousands of years of history that's been in the intellectual game that everybody knows.
So I'm actually going to answer your rhetorical question. Actually, it's funny. There is something that I say we almost as a chess community struggle with here. And like I referenced earlier in regards to the parallels between cooperative games, like we aren't like Rocket League, for instance, again, in the way that there are no positions on the field at any given time. There are no, there are no skill sets that certain players have over others that become complementary within a team, right? I mean, you may have players that are better in one team than they are in another. And that's not something that you typically have in chess, right? Everyone is as good on one team as they are on another team. It doesn't make a difference. There's nothing affecting their play as an individual. And something that we've thought about a lot is there's sort of a variation or a variant on chess, and it's called ultimate moves, whereby there's, let's say, a team of 4 players or 2 players or however many you need, and they make 1 to 5 moves individually at a time on the same board, and then the other player will come in, move 1 to 5 times. The next player comes and moves 1 to 5 times. So that to me is something that mirrors in that sort of cooperative esports significantly more closely than playing the individual game on a board. But again, it is a significant departure from chess. Now, is it a significant enough one that's going to lose the purists who frankly make up still the core of our viewers? And will the new viewers that we gain offset that loss of viewership? I'm really not sure, but I do think that that's one way that frankly chess could evolve into more of an esport in a competitive environment by, increasing the movement of players being able to play on one board, and frankly, have to make up for their teammates and carry their teammates, and certain players play better with others, right? And so then suddenly you would have a dynamic where it's not just the top players, playing and that they're going to win, right? Because as I alluded to earlier, in the Magnus Carlsen versus Fabiano Caruana championship match, I mean, Magnus Carlsen was a significant favorite. And although I did mention that all 12 of those classical time control, right, the slower games ended in draws, it was almost a foregone conclusion because of Magnus Carlsen's superiority in fast chess that he would win that world championship. And there wasn't too much of a question that he would. And that happens a lot at the very upper echelons. You're like, wow, these guys are so closely matched, but over a large enough sample size, or in as faster time controls, they're not. So I do think that that's one way. And the other way is, as I wanted to get into, speed chess, faster time controls. And what I mean by that is time controls all the way from, let's say, 15 minutes plus 2-second increment, which is like the amount of time you get added back onto your clock when you make a move, all the way down to 1 minute chess, right? And what this does is, when you have a typical game, which might have 120 minutes on a clock on each side, or even more sometimes, maybe 100, you might even have 150 minutes. You're talking about, from a consumer perspective, a very difficult commitment, right? I mean, you're asking people to commit to watching a 5 or 6 hour chess game. That's just not reasonable, right? I mean, the majority of our broadcasts that do really well are anywhere from like 2.5 to 4 hours. And when we go over that, or when we go below that, we miss out on significant ad revenue, significant viewership. And I think that in many ways, chess could do itself a favor by moving its time controls down to significantly faster speeds now that we're in the more modern era. And the other thing that does is it sort of creates a little more variance in the game, right? So one of the reasons why poker around, let's say 2006 to 2008 became very, very popular is because Chris Moneymaker, who was just an accountant at the time, won the World Series of Poker main event. And the reason he was able to win that is because there's a built-in variance to poker that simply doesn't exist in chess, right? The better player in chess is going to win the game depending on how much better they are than their opponent a significant percentage of the time. And you typically know, right, who's going to win a tournament. If you have 20 players in that tournament, I can go through and be like, there is a 99% chance that this person will finish in the top 2 in this tournament. If you go to a poker tournament, you have no idea, right? And I think that even within a lot of premier titles in esports, it's like the best players are the best players. And there is nobody that's going to stop them point blank, right? I mean, they may be in a team that's a little weaker than last season, but that person as an individual, if I watch like, Squishy Muffins play or Kronobi or somebody like that in Rocket League, like I know that those are just top players and they're going to be some of the top guys, or Garrett or whoever, right? And that there is like no real way to stop these guys. And I think that that's one of the things that definitive esports and definitive games like chess is missing. It needs a component of variance. And when you speed up time controls and you make players think more quickly, they make mistakes. I mean, it'd be like playing, a shooter in, with a more sensitive, controller or something like that, right? Where, it takes significantly more skill to control it. And you could say, okay, Nick, well, that means that the best players would just be better, but that's not always true. Sometimes players that are great in fast time controls are not as good in classical time controls. And while there is some crossover, I say that plot would be typically pretty noisy. So I don't know. I would love to see that. A lot of top players advocate for it.
Yeah, I guess there's 2 things from that, right? Number one is traditional sports are making things faster. The XFL has just launched, which is basically the NFL but faster.
Yep.
It's been a great success for the global cricket scene to introduce T20, which is 20 overs. They went from having a 3 to 5 day test to having 1 day internationals at 50 overs, and now they've got 20 overs where, the people who are known as sloggers, the ones that run out and, just throw the bat at it and do some big hits and are exciting, they're the people that shine. However, to play in a 5 day test, if you want to make 400 runs, you have to be literally endurance athlete, be like Matthew Hayden or Brian Lara and make 400 runs, because you're literally running, I don't know how many meters or feet it is, between the wickets, but it's a bit, and you're doing that quite often for days in end, often in 30-degree heat, right out in the middle of this massive oval. So it takes very different types of people that can, get into the groove very quickly and do that. And a very different type of bowler who can sustain that fast bowling over a 4-day stint, multiple overs at a time, versus just in that quick hit out. That makes sense. And the other thing you said that I was thinking, and then you said it was about poker and the reinvention of that as well. One of our partners is Joe Hasham, who won the World Series of Poker many moons ago as well. Very similar, came from a nobody to win. And, he's constantly thinking about that. It's in his opinion, he's been saying this for years, that poker is dying. And he thinks something that can help to save that is making it a team sport. And while traditionally it is a 1v1, similar to you saying with chess, he's been theorizing and running some preliminary events to say, okay, how can we make this a team sport where you've got 3 people and you kind of, it's three people in a team and you play 1v1v1, and maybe you have a champion that can go back in to kind of, hit that tiebreaker round or something like that. And that's something that I feel works so well in esports, because you think about, like, all the time someone wants a gym buddy to go to the gym, because it's hard to motivate yourself. It's hard to just jump onto Counter-Strike all the time. It's hard to just jump onto StarCraft 2 by yourself. It's hard to get up at 5 a.m. another day and just go to the gym alone listening to a podcast. But if you've got a mate that calls you up and says, we're going to the gym and coming to pick you up, you don't have another choice. And then when he's down and you want to go, it's the same thing. You do the opposite. So is it similar for chess, where someone will stop playing because all their mates will be like, no, just come play Rocket League with us. There's 2 of us who want you to come and be our third. Whereas, if it's a team scenario, then they're pulling each other in to play with and against each other.
What's funny about that is that you actually see this on chess.com quite often, right? I mean, the top players want to play against the other top players. And so you'll literally have them. And this actually used to happen in online poker before it kind of had a little bit of a downfall, was that, you'd have players maybe sitting at a table for X amount of time. And then another player may not show up until they know that player is coming to play, right? And so you see the same thing in chess. Like, you'll have 2 top blitz players like Hikaru Nakamura and Daniel Naroditsky, and they will, talk to each other offline and be like, hey, like, let's go play chess, right? Let's go on chess.com and go play chess. But they're not just going to go on. And once that game ends, once one of them has to leave, the other one might stick around for a little bit, but like, chances are probably not. They want to play against the top players. They need to get motivated by, the support of their mates, like you said. And I think that's a big part of it. Getting back to the speed thing you were talking about, where, there are different skill sets at different time controls. Another sport that I think mirrors this very closely is rugby, right? So, I mean, you see completely different body types and skill sets between 7s and 15s. And I think that there's a real, kind of serious component there that you talk about, the difference between speed chess and classical chess, slow chess, that it is a lot like watching 7s and 15s. And for the crowd, people are like, oh, 7s is the future because the entire world has, attention deficit disorder, and you need these games to be like 15 minutes long or nobody's going to pay attention. Which is ironic because it's not like 15s takes that long, but the point is, you have a little bit easier to understand. I mean, seven players in the field, and some winger tries to run fast and score a try, and that's how it works. And you more or less understand how that works. There are a lot more set plays and technique and things that go into 15s, and I think that it's a lot like that in chess as well. There's a lot more to understand in slower chess. And if you watch like Hikaru Nakamura, to use him as an example again, as a streamer, is probably the most successful individual streamer on Twitch within the chess category. But he is one of the top players in the world. I mean, he just won the silver medal, got to the final of the World Blitz Championship against Magnus Carlsen 2 months ago. This isn't a guy that's just good at internet chess. This is the equivalent of like somebody who is literally, nearly a world champion in his field. And he's on there and he's playing these extremely fast games. They might be like 3-minute or even 1 minute or 6-minute games of chess. And he's drawing thousands of people to come watch him. And do you know how many of those people that are watching understand what's happening in his game? Like 2 of them, maybe, right? And that's only if his 2 friends are hanging out in the chat that also play at his level. Really difficult to understand, but they don't care about that. You know what they care about? They care about the hype. They care that Hikaru is crushing his opponent, or they care that Hikaru is having an off day and is getting crushed, right? Although that does rarely happen. But the bigger point is that it creates a lot more emotion, a lot more energy, a lot more hype when you have chess played at a faster time control. And as you said, I think some of that motivation really does come down to there being very few super elite players, and they have to motivate you. Like, I bet it's hard for bodybuilders to get up and go motivate themselves to go work out, right? I mean, you see bodybuilders even training in pairs. I mean, this happens, right? Maybe not at the very top level. They have like trainers and teams around them, but at the amateur level, amateur bodybuilders is difficult. You got to be in the gym every day, and you need someone to motivate you to do it before you've had your coffee, right? So I think esports are probably working the same way for the premier titles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I guess just like you were saying, that's when a team becomes a thing, right? An MMA fighter, when they're sitting in their corner, is 3 people plus themselves. They've got multiple coaches and physiotherapists and people, and listening to an interview with Max Holloway, who's the previous featherweight world champion, and Aussie just beat him recently, saying that he doesn't do anything. He literally gets his schedule sent to him by his coaches, and he just rocks up. So it's great when you're at that level. But yeah, it's really hard when you're when you're grinding, to get to that period. And and I guess it's always like different horses, different courses, right? Test cricket maybe isn't as popular as 2020 is today, but it's still good to have in the background sometimes, and that slow pace can be enjoyed. However, the T20 is extremely exciting, and that's where the passion is made, and that's where the crowds are cheering, and you can make that cool content from, and that might bring people across to the slow game, but it's a way to kind of suck them into the ecosystem to start off with.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a lot of what we're trying to do now with our broadcast, where we've been doing a lot of reflection now that we've become a little more popular on Twitch with, okay, we're not so much competing, let's say, with other chess companies a lot of times, although we obviously have a ton of respect for them. Most of the time, we're just competing with, again, the difficulty of chess, and then, other sort of intellectual endeavors, right? Or like Hearthstone or other strategy games. And my biggest point to this is that, and I saw someone ask actually in the Twitch chat, what about AI, right? And what about how that applies to chess? I think it's a really interesting point, right? That chess engines have become so strong that, there isn't a single human in the world that could beat them at full strength. Even not the top engines, even like some of the middling engines. And the reality is that, engines typically know best, but we don't always know why they know best, right? And so there's something in chess called an evaluation. And what that means is that you have a bar on the side of the board that is constantly shifting, right? One side is white, one side's black. And then, you have, let's say if white has the majority of the bar 3/4 of the way, you would say that the white player is winning, right? They're winning, or better is what we would call it in chess. Depending on how what that evaluation is. But it's really difficult to explain that to someone new. But the point is, if you're just watching the broadcast and you're glancing at it, right? It really does help with some of the context. If you see a little bar that's shifting and white makes a move and the white part goes way down, right? And then you have black coming and you go like, wow, they must have just made a mistake, because now suddenly the black player is, I wonder why that is. And let me just say that as chess has become stronger at the top levels, right, you have commentators who traditionally have not used an evaluation bar, have not used an engine for analysis, have not seen what we would call engine lines, which show them the best upcoming moves. There might be multiple moves coming up where they have the best moves. And they've always prided themselves on not using these engines, right? And that's great when you have diehard chess fans who really want to sit in your broadcast and learn, and they're going to be there for the next 2 hours. But what about the people who are just glancing on the Twitch front page and you're in the top slot and there's 20,000 people watching your broadcast? There's a significant opportunity to draw those people in. And how do you do that, right? You do that by giving them clues and giving them hints so they don't feel stupid. No one wants to feel stupid. I think that's just like a universal thing, no matter what they're doing. And I think that chess has done a really poor job of being elitist and making people feel bad that they don't understand what's going on. Frankly, now I'm in, let's say the top 1% of chess players on chess.com or maybe even higher than that. But when I started playing chess and I was a lower level player, significantly lower level player, I didn't understand what was going on. And I would watch chess broadcasts. I wanted to become interested in the game. And that was one thing that I remember. And while I may not remember it clearly in terms of like what would have really helped me, I remember how I felt when I watched those games. And I remember how I felt when I watched those broadcasts and you had commentators bragging about how they don't use the engine here and how, and we're all learning together. And it's great, but guess what? I have like 30 minutes and then I have to go to work, and I would really just love to understand why this player is winning and why this player is not. And if you could explain that to me, that would be great. And I think that, the same thing goes, like you talked about League of Legends or Dota 2, like there's steep learning curves, right? There's serious modes to entry when you're watching it. Like I've watched Dota 2 and I've watched LOL, right? I'm watching it and I'm like, what is happening? Like who is winning and how do I know? I don't know, right? But I want to know because it's popular for a reason. These games wouldn't be the super, eSports titles that they are, and wouldn't have these massive crowds if they weren't cool and attractive, and if there wasn't something to it. And I believe, and I think most people believe, in the wisdom of crowds. And chess is the same way. You hear things like people quoting like, all right, there's 600 million people in the world that play chess. You hear this kind of statistic bandied about everywhere. And like that may be true or it may not be true, but let me tell you something. Regardless of if it's true or not, chess is clearly, chess is loved by a lot of people and it's played by a lot of people. And there has to be a reason to that. But I would love to, be able to take someone who's just coming across the channel and say, hey, here's why, don't worry, you're not going to feel stupid, we're going to take care of you. And I think, frankly, commentators and other esports have started doing a lot better job of bridging that gap of new viewers to like the basics of the game that they're watching. Yeah. And commentators can do can really do themselves a service with no matter how much expertise they have in the game, which they really do. And frankly, I think that we have the top commentators in chess, but I think that overall, on the whole, chess commentators do a lot better trying to make the game a lot more accessible by frankly, and producers by including elements that really give those new viewers a chance. So.
Yeah, the sliding bar makes perfect sense to me. They introduce an AI system like that in Dota 2, and they have a win probability calculator.
Yeah.
And they always go over that, and that helps. And if you're a player, you can actually utilize it in game. It'll tell you, judging by the heroes the enemy team is picked, here's a percentage likelihood that people would pick these heroes to win against them. Here's a percentage likelihood to pick these abilities when you get into the game in set order, and also to buy these items that are based on that, not just based on how you think or feel, but on the data that's available to them. So it makes perfect sense to me. So where can people follow you online if they'd like to catch up and learn a bit more about chess, see you play, or play themselves on chess.com?
Nobody would want to watch me play, but if you want to watch all the top players in the world play, you can go to twitch.tv/chess. We're also on multiple platforms. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, Mixer. You can go to chess.com/TV. Let me tell you, chess is a absolutely beautiful game. I mean, there's a reason why people get addicted to chess, and I caught the bug at a later age. It's never too late. Well, I'm 33, but it's never too late to start, no matter who you are. And I think maybe the most important thing about chess is that when you go to chess.com or when you're watching these broadcasts, you're going to notice that you're going to come away and you're going to feel sharper. You're going to feel a little more like you do when you're at your best. And I think that being able to translate those skills that you're going to pick up by playing chess into your daily life, into your career, your personal life, your social life, that's where the invaluable gain comes in. And I think that's the most incentive that somebody would have for learning or playing chess. And yeah, but come watch us on Twitch, come watch us on any other platform, and be happy to have you. And I promise, come in, ask any question you want, and we will have people who will be able to answer those questions for you.
Yeah, it sounds good. I used to be a member of chess.com myself back in the early high school days, but the best I could ever achieve is the 4-move checkmate. I'm trying that at some chess tournaments. It worked once. That's about
it. Let me tell you something. It still works. It works even on good players sometimes. You'd be surprised.
Yeah. Well, it's all about the deception, and it's all about, well, I mean, in esports they call it the cheese, right? Hitting them with the cheese strategy, which is one of those like cheap shots, but sometimes it works. You never know. Awesome, mate. Well, thanks so much for.
That's great. Yeah.
Thanks, Nick.
Chris. Thanks so much. Go ahead.
And thanks to everyone for watching. Sorry for these. There's been some technical difficulties throughout here. Unfortunately, living in Australia, the internet is not great. So sometimes we have this lag. But thanks to everyone who's watching on LinkedIn and all of the comments to come through from here. And shout out to people like Shark and Steve in the chat. Craig Horn, who's from the Australian Computing Society and just achieved a PhD himself late last year, which is awesome to see, saying that he learnt his I'll probably mince these words, but you'll get it. He learned his boats gambits from watching Alexandra on Twitch.
Yeah, he's talking about the Botez gambits. This is Alexandra Botez. It's sort of a running joke that she blunders her queen, which is basically giving up your queen with no compensation because you just make a mistake. But the common terminology there is a gambit would be like sacrificing a piece to gain some other sort of advantage. In her case, she doesn't get any advantage. She just loses the piece, and the people love it. So I'm glad that you learned the Botez Gambit. Come check us out, chess.com, twitch.tv/chess, and you'll learn plenty more.
Fantastic. So thanks for coming on, and thanks to everyone once again for listening in, whether you're watching on LinkedIn live right now on Twitch TV or listening to this podcast later. We've got plenty more guests coming in the next couple of weeks. We're absolutely chock-a-block, and we've had so many inbounds from all of you who'd like to come on board, which is fantastic. So thanks for listening, guys. Bye for now.
Awesome.